One of the kind of sobering issues in all of this that I am frequently reminded of is that there are certain kinds of interventions where the impact may not be seen until some time has
I mean,
elapsed.
sometimes it's more than a decade or two later, right? I mean, in
Yes,
some extreme
yes.
cases.
And there's a famous series of studies that was done by Mark Greenberg, and he developed interventions for adolescents who were at risk for substance abuse. And many of these were also contemplative-based interventions. And in some of that work, they did not see any immediate effect of the intervention. But fortunately, they followed these people, and in some cases, they did not see the effects emerge until 5 or 7 years
Hmm.
later,
Hmm.
which is kind of remarkable. And so, right now, Simon, you can tell us what the longest follow-up has been of any study with a meditation app. Probably less than a year.
I think it's probably a year or less. Yeah.
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 And so, one of the cool things about the use of the meditation app in research is that we have the potential to track the use of the app beyond the period of the formal study. And so we can know through the back end data, so to speak, how much people are engaged with it after the
Hmm.
study has ended. Um, and we can also track the longer term effects in
Hmm.
principle. And so that's something that really I think we'll see more of in the future.
Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Dharma Lab and everybody here listening. We're here with our dear friend and colleague and brilliant scientist, Simon Goldberg, who just published a really, really interesting article on meditation apps and, in fact, is one of the leading scientists on the planet studying the use of meditation apps and how effective they are. So we're very excited to be here to have this conversation. And as I was thinking about the backdrop for this, I was just reminded of some of my deep dives into the more traditional side of meditation traditions and reading about these accounts of people crossing over the Himalayas, in some cases at great risk to their physical health, tremendous amount of time and energy just to learn to meditate, just to encounter meditation teachers and get instructions. And then you fast forward now to the 21st century, and you literally can download an app and within 5 seconds, with pretty much zero friction, be learning from some of the greatest meditation teachers on the planet. So it's just a completely different ball game than what has happened historically with these traditions. And it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's amazing that everybody in the world, or most people in the world, have access to these kinds of things now. But it's also changed the whole way that this happens in pretty fundamental ways. So why don't we just kick this off with just some opening thoughts? I'd love to hear from each of you, and of course I can chime in a little bit. Just your opening thoughts about where we're at, not only with scientific research in this area, but just the whole idea of how these ancient meditative traditions are being passed down in the modern world. So maybe Simon, we can just start with you and just any kind of opening thoughts you might have or reflections before we dive into some of the science.
Yeah, thank you, Cort. Thank you both for having me. It's really fun to be here. Um, I love that reminder of sort of how this used to work. And for me, I learned to meditate from Thich Nhat Hanh books when I was 20 years old, and I was in rural North Carolina, and I would get these books and then go and sit out in the forest. And so for me, there's something, I think there's a resonant element to this sort of self-guided possibility, at least for getting started, that makes me less skeptical of the potential of these tools, um, because the practices themselves have so much potency. And if people are able to connect with them, I think a lot can be learned just from very relatively little instruction, or even relatively little personalized instruction to begin with, if someone's really interested in exploring them. Um, I have lots to say on the kind of status of the research and where some of this is going, but in general, I'm super enthusiastic about it. And I think digital health is obviously a major part of the future of mental health. And I think meditation is maybe one of the very best techniques to be delivered that way.
Hmm. What do you think, Richie? What's your
Yeah.
opening
Well,
take on this topic?
well, thank you, Simon, and it's great to have you here on Dharma Lab. I reflect on just the role of technology in general, and um, our teacher, Cort Rinpoche, has an enormous online presence, and people benefit all over the world from material that is available easily online. You can go to the Dalai Lama website and find a plethora of material that is available. This 20 years ago, none of this existed. And it is made Dharma available in a way that has democratized really uh, Dharma and allowed it to spread in ways that I don't think any of us really dreamt would be possible 20 years ago. So I think, I kind of come down on the side um, of believing that technology has an important role to play and has really helped to bring these teachings out in a very wide and equitable kind of way. Of course, there's a downside, and that's not unexpected. And I think that we need to be sensitive to it. Um, but one of the things that I always remind myself of is that with digital technology, we can harness the very best teachers in the world that otherwise may be difficult to have access to in person, um, and have those teachings be available. Uh, I think that, from my experience as a practitioner and being in the presence of great meditation teachers, there's no question that something is lost. It's not the same as being in person. Uh, uh, but, I think that it uh, is nevertheless very helpful, can really help relieve suffering, can also help to introduce people and give them a glimpse of what these experiences are like. And for those people who are really passionate about it and who really connect to these teachings, it will inspire them. And maybe they'll have an opportunity to have in-person teachings, which may add to the value that they might have derived from an app or from other kinds of technology. Um, uh, so I think it's all part of this larger mandala, if you will. And I do feel strongly that if we're going to scale well-being, and I certainly think that the majority of our viewers would agree, and beyond our viewers, that the world really critically needs this. I think technology is going to need to be part of the solution.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And Simon, your opening comment just about how you learned to meditate, it reminded me of my own journey as well, because it's true. I wasn't using a meditation app. Obviously, this was in the early 1990s when I started meditating, so it was not yet even a thing. But like you, I had no teacher, I had no community. I meditated purely from reading books for 7 years or so, 6, 7, 8 years, somewhere around in that range. And from that point of view, I would say what we get from apps now relative to books is probably a much richer experience than what I had in those early days. And despite not having a teacher and not having a community, I didn't even have any friends who meditated. I'm sure those of you who watched other Dharma Lab episodes might remember my comment that one of my friends would accuse me of joining a cult which I always thought was so amusing because I didn't have any other friends in the cult with me, which it felt like just the loneliest cult in history. But in any case, it just shows that you can actually do life-changing things without all of that, which isn't to say having a teacher in a community isn't incredibly helpful, but there are unique things you get from technology and from apps that actually you don't get. So for me, it's not an either or, it's just different, and maybe each has something unique to contribute. But now the science, there's a lot of data on this. So maybe we can just dive into a very basic question, which is whether or not they even work, and what do we know about how effective they are, and maybe a follow-up question after we get through that. How effective are they relative to more traditional modes of learning? So what do we know at this point, and how definitive is the science?
Yeah, I'm happy to share my thoughts on that. Another framing that just came to mind in this conversation was that maybe people are getting the Dharma from the apps, and you can get that from the book, but the sort of Buddha experience and Sangha experiences might be harder to access. And
although you measured therapeutic alliance, and that could be a Buddha-ish
relational quality. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's anyways.
And there are stories of people getting enlightened from hearing text. I mean, the textual tradition is quite rich, right?
Yeah,
and has been around for a long time. So my sense, and I've been involved a little bit in some of the meta-analytic work, where meta-analysis being a research technique and a data analysis technique where you combine results from lots of studies. I always like to compare it to Yelp reviews, where you get a star rating that is some estimate of the effectiveness of an app or the deliciousness of a restaurant. And there are now, dozens of trials that have been done on meditation apps for various outcomes. And my sense of the literature is that they're clearly beneficial, but only to a modest degree, to a large extent. And this is on common mental health symptoms, things like depression, anxiety, and stress. We regularly see effects that psychologists would define in the sort of small magnitude range. But this is from often very light touch interventions or very kind of minimal dosage interventions.
And what is a minimal, like when you say minimal dosage, give me a sense of what do you actually mean?
So in a lot of our trials, and some of our effects are in those ranges. Sometimes our effects have been bigger. I'm happy to share more details from the work that we've all done together. But someone might use a meditation app, say for 12 days or an average of 5 minutes a day. So a relatively, in the span of the meditative traditions, a few sittings in some cases could, be longer than that.
Yeah.
Simon, what do we know about the comparative effectiveness with regard to in-person training?
So there haven't been a lot of studies that have done that comparison. A lot of these app studies are done in large samples, which makes, you can do a large intervention when it's a digital intervention, but they rarely have direct comparisons with in-person interventions. If we look at the effect sizes so the Yelp ratings side by side, they're certainly bigger in-person. So just to put numbers around them, for the apps, they tend to be 0.2 to 0.3 for depression and anxiety. And for in-person, they tend to be in the sort of 0.5 to 0.7 or 8. So quite a bit larger, maybe twice as large for most of the in-person interventions.
And it's my sense, but correct me if I'm wrong about this, it's my sense that in some sense that's really comparing apples to oranges, because the duration of the training for in-person is typically much longer on average than it is for the apps. Is there any comparison at all that's been done where the durations are matched?
I don't think so. I mean, there's a whole internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy literature that's a lot older than meditation apps, is one of the kind of early digital mental health implementations. And my read of that literature is that when they are doing those head-to-head comparisons between digital and non-digital in the sort of general mental health space, you can get more equivalence between the two of them, even in relatively minimal guided versions of some of those interventions. So there's certainly digital implementations that can be quite potent. And some of those interventions, I mean, the manualized forms of cognitive behavioral therapy have very clear skills, say for cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, has a very specific plan. And so you might have a few meetings with a coach kind of helping you implement the plan, but it's very oriented to the skills. And some of those treatments really seem like a great fit for that digital implementation, either self-guided or minimally guided kinds of implementations. And the effects from those are super promising.
It's interesting to me because it's, from a scientific point of view, you want to get the interventions as matched as you can. But from another point of view, if you just look at like how this plays out in the real world, they're clearly just different. Like you would never, you would go to a class or to a retreat and you would expect to do it for hours. I mean, you wouldn't expect to go in and you spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes a day and then you leave. Nobody would do that. Nor would you expect to do an app and sit on the phone for 90 minutes and listen to, like that would never never happen. So, but it does make it obviously difficult to compare. The other thing that's kind of shocking to me about this is, again, we tend to design these around the constraints of how science happens, not necessarily how we think of like the normal time course of the meditative process. When I think of my own journey, I don't know how it was for you guys. I started reading books. I got really excited, and you guys both know me. I'm kind of a fanatic about anything I do. But even as being fanatic about this stuff, it took me a while to get a regular practice going. I had like a year of like on and off again, even though intellectually I was very interested. And then I took a class and I started paying a lot more money, and I was still just totally meditating, or not. I paid a lot of money for that class, and that I think motivated me to kind of get more out of it. So I still was practicing on my own, but I started doing it regularly at that point. I did twice a day for 20 minutes. And I would say it was after like 6 months that I really felt like my life had changed.
Yeah.
Like dramatically. But if I look at that whole time course, that's probably 2 years, at least a year and a half of kind of starts and fits and ups and downs. And, we typically look at, like you said, maybe it's 2 weeks or a month. And then we have a follow-up for, if we're lucky, 3 to 6 months. And so it's like, who said that you should see a lot of benefits in that? Like nobody said that, but it's how science occurs. So to me, it's almost amazing that actually we see the results we do in a relatively short time period. Because a lot of, the traditions would say like, it's like exercise. Of course you could look at it from a short point of view, but really you need to sustain these practices. They should be, you need to kind of maintain them to really derive the benefit.
And I just want to...
along those lines, I'm curious, what is the longest duration of time that a meditation app has been studied?
That's a good question.
The longest follow-up?
Yeah.
Or even the longest active intervention.
Yeah, that's really what
I've never seen anything over a month. Have you guys?
There are 8-week versions of things that are out there, I'm pretty sure.
We published ourselves one that was...
That's true. We are very sure. That's right.
We did. I'm probably a co-author on that paper. I should
you
know
probably
better.
are. But it's true. A lot of the follow-ups are, we have we have data from a 5-month follow-up. It's a huge problem in the field, really, for not understanding. To me, a bigger issue that I think speaks to your point, Cort, is that our measures are super crude. Anxiety and depression typically means something like the Generalized Anxiety 7 or the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, and it's very crude. It's not, I'm sure, getting at
could you just say a little bit for people who are listening?
Yeah.
We have these questionnaires. Like, what's the common question?
Items.
Yeah. What are some items?
Yeah, so I could pull it right up, but I won't do that because so in the depression measure, it'd be a measure of what's called anhedonia, so a lack of pleasure or interest in things that you typically enjoy, and you're rating it over the last 2 weeks, saying whether it's happening not at all or to all of the time. And then on the anxiety measures, it would be things like feeling keyed up or having sleep difficulties would be some of the cardinal symptoms of generalized anxiety.
So basically
worry.
Like short questionnaires.
Short questionnaires.
Symptoms related to depression and anxiety.
Yeah. And we've studied relational, how your relationships might have changed. But a lot of these things, certainly the deep end of the pool can be quite subtle. And we don't have good measures of a lot of the kinds of transformations, I'm sure, that happens to people as they deepen in their practice.
So what would you say? So you talked about the effect sizes, which is just like how much change is occurring in a given period of time. Not surprising that it's larger for doing like a more traditional in-person course. Of course, if you do that, typically, I mean, what's a typical mindfulness-based stress reduction course? I think you meet 2 hours a day, 2 hours a week for 8 weeks, and then you have
Yeah.
kind of a half-day retreat, I think is the standard.
Yes, after week
So if you
6.
add up the hours, that's a lot. Where if you take
30 hours total.
30 hours total. So whereas we've seen with the Healthy Minds app, 4 to 5 minutes a day for a month. So of course you can do the math there, and it's dramatically different. I mean, like kind of astronomically different in terms of the time commitment. What could people expect? I mean, when you say small to moderate effect sizes in real world terms, what does that mean? If somebody's saying like, "Hey, is this worth my time?" It might be a little less than motivating to say like, it's a small, like,
Yeah.
what does it really mean in real world terms for
I
somebody?
haven't done this exact translation, but I think Dan Harris estimating 10% is probably a good mental benchmark, at
You'll get
least.
10% happier. Like he was
You might get
literally right.
10% happier. We should convert that and see how close he was.
Yeah. If that's
Yeah.
Richie, what would you say? What's the scientific case for meditation apps for somebody who's just wondering whether they should go that route?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that doesn't often get communicated in the popular media, and even is not so clear in scientific papers, is kind of the dirty laundry of these studies, which is that there's huge variation among people
Yeah.
in how these apps work. So some people show really big effect sizes, and other people show small to no change. So there's a lot of variability, and I think that
And
that's
is there any, just to drill down on that very specific point, do we know what's predictive of whether or not people benefit from it?
I have a thought on this, and I think this will be useful for your viewers or your listeners. Those who ruminate more benefit more.
Hmm.
And we've
So
seen that.
maybe
Others
one way
have
to,
seen that. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like across many studies, actually even beyond the meditation app space, is that actually where we're struggling more, we have the most room to grow, actually. And so you tend to see where it's kind of counterintuitive, because sometimes you might think like, oh, I need to be in a good mental space to do this. But actually, it seems like in a lot of different domains and interventions, it's actually no, when you're really struggling, that's where we have the most to gain.
Yep.
So it seems like
we've
that's,
seen that very consistently.
Yeah.
Both in our laboratory work with biological measures, and also in the work that we've done more recently with our app-based interventions, that people who start off having more difficulty and showing more distress are the ones who show the larger benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's maybe a good segue into the study that we've all been involved with, but Simon, you've been the lead in, which is specifically with people who have clinical levels of depression and anxiety. We internally call it the BeWell study. We still haven't published anything on this, but is there any sneak preview you can give of what because that speaks very specifically. I mean, this is with the Healthy Minds app, which our listeners would have heard us reference many times over. But yeah, what's the sneak preview on your work there?
Yeah. And I want to tag it back to some of the questions that we're having around kind of key ingredients, and also this question of dosage that I know we're all interested in, because this BeWell study, had two versions of the Healthy Minds app that were compared. One that had meditation practices, and then the learns, the sort of well-being psychoeducation, science psychoeducation, and then one that just had the psychoeducational elements to it. And then there was a usual care control condition. And we saw very clearly that both versions of the app actually were quite effective relative to the usual care. So just that, I think, is a super fascinating data point. And we saw that across
you could, just
many
to put
measures.
this in terms that we've discussed in previous episodes, this is like the view like the part where you're just learning, you're not doing any meditation. Like that's the psychoeducation part that you mentioned, Simon. And this goes back to, actually, we've been discussing this for more than a decade. I think, Richie, actually, I remember sitting at your breakfast table very soon after I got to Madison, and we were talking about like how we could dissect, kind of disentangle view, meditation, and application. And Simon is one of the first scientists to actually look at this in a really rigorous way. So there's like the part where it's just the view. You're just learning and shifting your perspective, not necessarily doing any formal meditation practice.
That's
And then
right.
the other one, which is the more traditional version of the Healthy Minds program, is both those together. You have some learning components, some short lessons, and then you have practices. And then, of course, there's the third element of daily life application, which is yet another dimension that we're all super geekily interested in. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's important for viewers to appreciate in this particular study that we're talking about that in this so-called view condition, the participants were doing no meditation, zero. So there's absolutely no meditation.
They're basically just listening to stuff like this, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
They're listening to us just talk about the science of well-being and human flourishing and some of the underlying principles.
Yeah.
It's not all that different in a way.
And Simon, maybe it'd be helpful for viewers for you to share some of the key findings when you compare
Yeah.
the view group to the regular meditation group.
Yep. Yeah. So both clearly have some potency to them, but on our study's primary outcome. So if a study is a roulette table, this is where we put our chips, was on this measure of depression that we were talking about earlier. And we see at the 3-month follow-up that the group that had the meditation is outperforming the group that just had the view. So they're very similar.
Benefit,
they both benefit,
but
clearly.
they benefit more if they're doing both together.
Yep. And that effect is even more pronounced when you're comparing those who have higher levels of depression. So that's where that kind of combination seems to be really important, that having the application opportunity seems to be, a really important part.
And is there anything
That's
to say
the meditation. That's not the application. It's the meditation.
The meditation.
Yeah. And what about the right after the formal intervention ends at 1 month?
So we don't see differences on the depression measure, although I was just looking at these data yesterday. It seems like when we categorize people into clinically significant improvement or not, there is a higher rate of clinically significant improvement in the meditation group relative to the view only group. But I wouldn't trust that enough to come. We'll poke at that more to make sure that it survives all of the things we have to do to the data. But we also see differentiation at after the 4-week intervention, and then at the 3-month follow-up on our primary well-being measure, which is a multidimensional measure of flourishing, which assesses not just mental health symptoms, but relationships and meaning and purpose and those sorts of things. So we see a differentiation there. That's not huge magnitude, but it's very clearly there.
And what is it relative to, because there's also a waitlist control group in this study, right?
Yeah, so they both kind of hit it out of the park relative to the waitlist. The pictures really kind of tell the story very clearly. They're certainly outperforming the waitlist.
And is there anything to say about the biological side of things? Because that was another really unique part of this study. To have not only such a rigorous study design with such a huge sample, but also to be doing these biological measures is very, very unique, especially for a study of a mobile app like this. Maybe you could just share a little bit about what you guys did and what we found.
Yeah, and Richie can chime in too as our biologist in residence. So far, it seems that there are effects from the meditation group relative to the usual care group on an inflammatory biomarker called interleukin-6, which we measured through blood. People gave us little drops of blood on a piece of paper, and we analyzed those. And it seems that those in the meditation group were lower in inflammation relative to the control group, but not relative to the view-only group, actually. And then similarly, on a wide-ranging measure of changes in microbiome composition in stool samples, we see that there are actually quite a large number of different genera, I'm told, that is the level of bacteria categorization that we're looking at differences on. And it's quite amazing. You see all of these differences that are popping up between the group that had the meditation and the group that was in the usual care group that aren't there when you look at the view only versus the meditation group.
And
And
am I remembering
on,
right that
yeah.
it's like it's something about gut permeability with like leaky gut syndrome and things like that, things that am I remembering right?
Yeah, the changes were primarily in what's called the butyrate pathway that has as one of its essential functions sealing of the gut lining, which prevents leaky bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel syndrome, that kind of thing. And so these findings are potentially very exciting in underscoring the fact that training our mind in this way also appears to affect our bodies in ways
Mhm.
that may be beneficial for our physical health as well.
In such small amounts, because I assume we're still
Yeah,
talking on the order of 4 to 5 minutes of meditation a
that's
day,
right. That's
and
right.
you're seeing these effects, in
Yeah.
the body's inflammation response, in the microbiome of the gut. I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another set of findings that I think are super cool uh, are that people seem to change the way that they're talking. So we have this video based, it's called experience sampling task, where someone shares how they're uh, and they share about an emotional experience, positive or negative, that happened in the last 24 hours. And those in the meditation group, again, relative to the usual care, are using fewer negative affect related words and fewer first person pronouns. So I, me, mine kinds of pronouns. So this very
That's amazing.
implicit measure that I think is super cool. And that was something in our roulette table, thanks to Christy Wilson Mendenhall, we put our chips on those two uh, vocal or speech indicators and are seeing differences. But again, no differences versus the view only group. I think is super
Yeah, this
fascinating.
is amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. And to me, as I mentioned earlier, what's most amazing is just how quickly we see that it's such
Yeah,
a tiny amount of practice people are doing, and you're starting to see not only, your mind is beginning to shift, your perspective is beginning to change, but your biology is beginning to change. I think we would all expect that you need to continue and maintain practicing to, to continue not only hopefully to have further improvements and to maintain those improvements. So maybe we could talk briefly before we move on with the follow-up studies, because both in this study and in other work, we try to also track them over time, for at least a few months, if not 6 months in some cases. And what is the data there? Like, how consistently do people retain the benefits that we see early on, and do they tend to increase or decrease? And is that just purely tied to whether or not they keep practicing? I mean, what do we know about like where it goes from
yeah,
there after you do the intervention for a month or whatever it is?
yeah. The biological effects we only measured at baseline and the longest follow up. So those are the only time points.
Hmm.
The mental health
Longest
benefits.
follow-up being about 5 months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, so those improvements are there 5 months later from just doing
yeah,
5 minutes a day for a month.
yeah.
Amazing.
And the mental health benefits for the flourishing and depression that we talked about, both of those get a little bit larger actually in that 3-month follow-up period. So we
Hmm.
see more differentiation in the 3-month follow-up period. We do see a little bit of evidence that how much people are practicing um, is related to their improvement on depression. The relationship isn't super strong, but it does seem that people who are using it more are those who are benefiting more. And we see that, if I'm remembering correctly, when we combine all of their usage. So during the 4-week intervention period and the 3-month follow-up, that predicts their long-term effects.
And one of the kind of sobering issues in all of this that I am frequently reminded of is that there are certain kinds of interventions where the impact may not be seen until some time has
I mean,
elapsed.
sometimes it's more than a decade or two later, right? I mean, in
Yes,
some extreme
yes.
cases.
And there's a famous series of studies that was done by Mark Greenberg, who is a prevention
Hmm.
researcher that did this work when he was at Penn State. And he developed interventions for adolescents who were at risk for substance abuse. And many of these were also contemplative-based interventions. And in some of that work, they did not see any immediate effect of the intervention. So that after just looking pre-post the intervention, there was no significant change that was produced. But fortunately, they followed these people, and in some cases, they did not see the effects emerge. This was in a randomized controlled trial. They did not see the effects emerge until 5 or 7 years
Mm.
later,
Hmm.
which is kind of remarkable. And so, right now, Simon, please, you can tell us what the longest follow-up has been of any study with a meditation app. Probably less than a year.
I think it's probably a year or less. Yeah.
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 And so, one of the cool things about the use of the meditation app in research is that we have the potential to track um, the use of the app beyond the period of the formal study. And so we can know through the back end data, so to speak, how much people are engaged with it after the
Mm-hmm.
study has ended. Um, and we can also track the longer term effects in
Mm-hmm.
principle. And so that's something that really I think we'll see more of in the future.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's really interesting about this whole area is that if you think about, again, a more traditional way of learning to meditate, and here I'm not talking about ancient history traditional, but like going to a class, like going to mindfulness-based stress reduction, is that typically you pay for it. And even if you don't, you're expending personal time and energy. Like you're getting, you're hopping on a car or a bus or, and you have to go somewhere, you have to devote a lot of time. Like there's some skin in the game, so to speak. One of the beautiful things about apps is just there's so little skin in the game. You literally can download something. It takes zero time. Even the ones that do charge, usually there's a getting started thing that you can do for free for a week or 10 days. And then if you do pay, it might be $7 or $10. It's not like you're not paying hundreds of dollars. So on the one hand, it's wonderful that it's so easy for people to take those first steps. But we also know, and there's a lot of research on this, it's a whole different area, that when you do either pay for something or you expend your own time and money and energy in some other way, you're invested in it. And so you tend to
Mm-hmm.
give it more, you tend to be more committed to it. And so there's an interesting piece in this around engagement with the apps. And that's
Mm-hmm.
some of the dirty laundry,
Yeah.
is that just, compared to somebody who's paid $500 and is going to mindfulness-based stress reduction, you compare that to, a random person who just downloaded an app and didn't pay anything. What's the likelihood that that one person is still meditating a month or 2 months or 6 months
Mm-hmm.
later? So maybe
Mm-hmm.
we could talk about that. And then I'd love to talk about maybe kind of the forward-looking side of this, of what's sort of exciting for future research and hopefully for kind of where the whole field is going. But maybe we could talk about engagement, because I think it's for somebody who's using apps, you just need to know it's going to be harder. And there's probably
Yeah.
things we can do to set ourselves up for success, because just the casualness of apps actually will work against us in that we don't have that commitment. We don't have the skin
Mm-hmm.
in the game. So yeah,
Yeah, in the digital health space, they call it the hockey stick, and this is the engagement metrics, because it's really, and it's in days for probably most people, and you'll see 30 days out, maybe, a few percentage of people are still actively using most mental health apps that get downloaded, so that it's really, really rapid decrease.
Yeah. Do we know what the percentage of people who go through a 2-month mindfulness-based stress reduction course, what the percentage of those people are who are still meditating a year later?
I think that's been studied a little bit. I don't know offhand. I mean, they're like the activation energy is so different. I mean, there's the amount that you're paying, but also, Cort, to your point, to get myself to a class, to sign up for a class, like I'm
even
in
just to
such a
register for a class. I mean,
yeah,
you have to, there's like
yeah,
just all these steps. Each one of those is like a cost in a way. Like
yeah.
you're sort of expending time and money and energy to do something, and by the time you even get to the class, you've done 20
Yes.
steps and spent
Yes.
time. So that's even before you've shown up for the first class.
Yeah, and my point is that even with that kind of investment that's required for something like that, my sense is that the percentage of people
Yeah.
still meditating a year later is probably
Yeah,
pretty.
even then,
Yeah. It's probably, yeah.
it's hard. Yeah,
Yeah.
because the truth is, in fact, we found this a lot with the Healthy Minds program in the early days when we did not the more kind of rigorous scientific research, but we were doing more design research just to try to see if it was working for people and what they were saying. And we saw a lot of people falling away and kind of stopping using the app. This is right, again, at the very beginning phases of development. And what we heard universally, almost to a person, in fact, I don't think we ever heard anything that was different than this, was something to the effect of, I like it. I feel better when I do it. I want to do it.
Yeah.
I know it's good for me, but I had a busy weekend or I went on vacation and I forgot about it. Or I just, I was sick for a few days and I lost it. Just habit formation.
Yeah.
That was like the only thing. It wasn't like they needed to be convinced they should do. I mean, it's just like how we feel about
Yeah.
diet and
Yeah.
exercise. Like we know it's good for us. We know we feel better, and yet it's just hard. It's just hard to make a habit out of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had a behavioral economist hanging out these past 2 weeks. So he studies medication adherence. And I guess forming habits is hard in lots of disciplines or lots
Yes.
of health behavior. I mean, to me, I'm not completely troubled by that. I think there's maybe something okay about being introduced to a technique, having it in the back of your mind, maybe hopefully having had some kind of potent, sticky experiences. And then when, things hit the fan, there's some part of you that remembers that there's a way to work with this. And maybe now's not the moment for it, but suffering's going to come. And if you have some sense that there's something you can do about it, I think even that can be really powerful for people. It can be a gift for people.
Yeah. And it's not a linear thing either. I mean, really, with any meaningful change that we make in our lives, it's not as though we wake up one morning and we say, oh, I'm going to change my life in X way. And then we just do it and it's done and we've now changed. It's like it's up, it's down, we forget, we're excited, we're bored, we kind of go through all of this. And that's just, in Buddhist terms, we say that's the path. Like it's
Yeah.
messy, it's not
Yeah.
linear, it's messy. You kind of need to design with the assumption of messiness, where, and that's where it's still surprising to me that we see a signal in a month or 3
Yeah.
months or 6 months,
Yeah.
because it is, in a way, the real promise of these things is long term. So that's the cool thing. So what's exciting going forward here? We're sitting on some really, really cool data. You've mentioned some of it here. I know all three of us are really interested in how we can leverage some of the new technologies, AI and machine learning, and there's even more cool stuff in the works. But what are you most excited about? Maybe we can start again with you, Simon. But Richie, I'd love to hear what you are most excited these days in this whole world.
At the end of the paper that David Cresswell and I did that you mentioned at the beginning, we have a picture that was AI helped generate that picture, by the way. But it really sees these apps in this much broader network of other intervention components. And it really feels to me that we're at the very, very beginning of digital mental health interventions and meditation apps in particular. And there's really countless ways that we could imagine these evolving that could really benefit people in the coming years. So just an example I know we were talking about earlier. So I try to have my bike ride to work be a formal practice for me, where I'm really using that as an active practice, as you would say in the app. And it's easy for me to forget that. But wouldn't it be cool if there was some haptic signal that I could receive when I got on my bike, when it knew based on my geolocation that I was going to be riding home, and it would remind me, maybe repeatedly, maybe it even figures out somehow physiologically when I'm sort of losing losing concentration and has some reminder, this is your practice, stay with this while you're here, or sets a brief intention, some sort of reflection to do during that time period. And that's just one example. Of course, there's countless moments in the day and countless situations, during stressful events or relaxing events where that kind of integration could happen. Thankfully, we're getting to run a study with a wearable, kind of a second version of the BeWell study. So we'll have electrodermal activity, hopefully, in that study. So we'll hopefully get much more of a sense of how people are physiologically being impacted by these practices that could guide those kinds of interventions in the real world as the technology matures.
So cool. What about you, Richie? What's exciting in your world?
Three interrelated things. One is that this technology, and they're related to what Simon says, this technology provides an opportunity for more personalized training. And clearly the data consistently show these very big individual differences or variations in how people respond. And we have the strong conjecture that if we could figure this out, it may be that there are different strategies that are more efficacious for different kinds of people. So that's one really big opportunity that I think is on the horizon. The second is just-in-time intervention. So although well-being and flourishing is largely thought of as a trait, there are variations in our mood and you can think of it as our well-being throughout the day. And for people that are vulnerable, who are really suffering, we're doing some work in this center these days that we're involved with, both of us are involved with, that has to do with the prevention of suicide among people who are at potential risk for suicide. Suicide is a really kind of snap judgment in a lot of people, and it's very episodic and often happens quite spontaneously.
So not like they're planning for weeks and weeks and then finally,
Right. I mean, there are
it's more
certainly
like just
some,
at the.
there are some people who do that planning, but there are other people for whom it's really more of an impulsive act.
Mhm.
And if we can figure out what the immediate precursors are,
Mhm.
imagine a just-in-time intervention being delivered that may really be helpful. That may have, for example, something to do with connection, which may really be helpful in that moment. And the third piece is, um, you know, going back to Mingyur Rinpoche, he has developed a program for beginning meditators called Anytime, Anywhere meditation. And I've kind of jokingly renamed it Every Time, Everywhere. It's kind of
That's the advanced. You're in the advanced level.
I try to be. But it's really, how can we microdose this stuff?
Yeah.
To have it available in all the nooks and crannies of our everyday life. And it's a big design problem, I think, in terms of figuring out how to best provide those opportunities in ways that are not annoying, but actually are helpful. But if we can figure that out, we can be really sprinkling everyday lives with these invitations, if you will, that can really, I think, be tremendously beneficial. And I think these are really the power of technology, but we're not even close to harnessing it at this point in time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think for that last point about microdosing well-being is definitely, for me, I think there's just so much potential, especially in our fast-paced lives. In fact, I just remembered earlier today, I had a meeting, with a group of people, and it was, budgeting and planning. I mean, very like not meditative stuff normally, but we started the meeting with a little appreciation practice. And we just it was just like 60 seconds of the instruction was so simple. Just think of whatever comes to your mind, anything that you appreciate or you're grateful for. That was it. Like it was
Mhm.
just bring to mind whatever that is. And then after that, we said, oh, why don't we just each share? Like, if you want, just share what you thought about. So I shared, I just thought of my son, who's a 20-year-old in college and is going through a rough time. And I just thought, oh, he can be a pain in the ass sometimes, but I love him and I'm so grateful he's in my life. I'm so happy he's my son. I just thought that.
Mm.
And one of my colleagues was saying, oh, my dog, he's just unconditional love and and just and then we went into the budgeting stuff, but you could just see just the
Yeah.
energy was so different than if we had not done that. And it literally took
Yeah.
90 seconds. I mean, it was this tiny little thing, but you could just see for everybody in that meeting, it was different, right? Because there's sort of a spillover effect where, like you were saying, Richie, it is like a little micro dose, but then it has
Mm.
like a durate, kind of like a spillover effect that colors. And if you just have a few of those moments throughout your day, imagine that's like once or twice an hour, you have just like a little thing like that. Your life is different if you do that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you don't have to sit down and meditate. You don't have to go to some retreat. You don't have to really, it's just the midst of the flow of your everyday life. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. And I think one of the really important takeaways from this is that it's really often easier than you think. And I think it really has to do with the fact that we are built to flourish, and we have all the ingredients intrinsically. We just need to remind ourselves of these qualities and sort of just nurture them and get them activated a little bit. But once you do that, it really can come quite spontaneously.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a fantastic discussion. Something tells me this may not be the last time that Simon, you join us. I have a feeling we're going to have an endless list of things we want to talk to you about. So thank you so much for taking a little time. And Richie, of course, always an honor and privilege to have some time and conversation with you. And for everybody listening and watching, thank you for tuning in. And we will see you soon on another episode of Dharma Lab.